That's a very difficult and very loaded question. And without a time machine, we will not be able to look into the future. But looking back into the past and studying our history, and especially following Jacques Attali, what he laid out in his book Noise, I think we can make a good prediction. The future of art, or let me talk more especially about music here, the future of music definitely will be more diverse and more democratic. Let me start before I continue with two quotes that I think also fit very well to this question. One quote is from the Australian American composer Percy Grainger, and he said already in the beginning of the 20th century, 100 years ago, he said, "There is no difference between a symphony and a song sung under a tree. It is only snobs and idiots who once have separated the popular from classical." So that's Percy Grainger about 100 years ago, and more about that in a little bit. And then from the British industrial group Clock DVA, the future begins with a break from the past. And I think that's also a very good observation. Especially now, we're at a very special turning point in history. I personally believe we're at a turning point we haven't seen in 1,000 years. Since music, art music, developed out of popular music, since in Europe, tribal societies gave way to an aristocratic society that then later gave way to a bourgeois society. The development of music was more or less linear. But now we're at a breaking point and we're seeing things we have not ever seen before. So I said the future of music will be more democratic and it will be more diverse. With that I mean it will be less elite, and it will not all just be high art. Because what we call new music, what we call classical music, or what I prefer to call Western art music as a more appropriate and down to the point term, Western art music has been, as all art music around the world, always the music of social elite. And that's not an ideology, that's just a fact. Church music has been the elite of the clericus. Then early art music has been the music of the aristocratic elite. Then classic romantic music has been the music of the bourgeois elite. And then 20th century music was the music of an intellectual elite. Beethoven did not write his music for the worker. He did not write his music for the baker where he bought his bread every day. No, he wrote his music for an educated, well-knowing group of people in the bourgeois cities. So the future of art will be much more democratic. There's much more access to art making since the 50s, since electric guitars, but now especially since the computer. Everyone can open a computer and can create music. And so the approaches are much more diverse. There will be, and there are no more schools as we saw it all through the last 1,000 years. And actually, especially in the 20th century, we saw a war of different schools. There will be no fetish of material. It's not important anymore what kind of material you use. It will be important how you use that material. What do you do with the material you are using and you have chosen to use? So there will be no ideological barriers, as, for example, Adorno has laid out in his philosophy of new music. And he was very clear that that music and his writing is for an elite, done by an elite. And he was very clear about it. While in the 80s and 90s, we have seen popular music embracing the philosophy of the French post-structuralists. So the future of art will be no longer bourgeois, as we've seen it since classical music, when the bourgeois took over power from the aristocratic elite, and music went from being performed in the courts to actually being performed in bourgeois concert halls, which still was not concert halls for the simple folks. Bourgeois art always knew what is wrong, what is right, what is correct to use, and what is not correct to use. This will go. As I said before, all material will be available. All material is good material. All material can be used. It is really up to you how you use it and what you do with it will decide if your artwork is complex and anything worth. So what drew me to Delirium was exactly that. I met especially Victor when I was doing my Metal Machine Music project in Basel a few years ago. That is my transcription of Lou Reed's Metal Machine Music, which is a 64-minute long album which was released in 1975 of 1 hour of guitar feedback, the ultimate rock and roll album, and at the same time the ultimate art music album. So there was an album that combined both aspects of contemporary art. And when listening to that album, I immediately heard basically contemporary music, Xenakis orchestra works done on electric guitars. So I wanted to retransform it back to the orchestra. So I did a chamber music transcription of that work, which we performed in Basel, and that's where I met Victor. And we had talked a lot, and we realized we have a lot in common. We have a lot of ideas in common, and we have a lot of things we're not pleased with concerning the situation of the arts and music at the moment. Which still is in the hands of the bourgeois class, and which still is in its fundings clearly distinguishing high art and low art. And so we talked a lot, and we agreed to do a project together, which we're working on now, Bergmal. I'm personally working at the moment, as I already said before, on my big piece for Delirium called Bergmal. I just finished a short piece for the Parch Ensemble here in Los Angeles for 3 of the Parch instruments. I'm finishing a piece for the Parisian band IRE, which is a group of 5 performers doing live electronic music. And finally, I'm finishing my album for my noise metal band Blood Oath here in Los Angeles that consists of musicians who are all have an education in classical contemporary music, but are also rock musicians. My guitar player is an incredible conductor for music of Lachermann, Nono, and Ligeti. My other guitar player is a trained contemporary composer who is the guitar player now of Skinny Puppy, the American industrial metal band. My drummer is a very good experimental composer and metal and jazz drummer, and also a contemporary percussionist who can play Xenakis. So that band, for example, brings together all those elements without watering them down. And I think that's the biggest problem at the moment. I advise you all stay away from crossovers. That's the big word at the moment. But what does that mean? A crossover always means to go from a place you know really well, cross over the bridge into a place you don't know at all. And very often, most composers don't even like to study that place they're crossing over to. They just pretend they know it. Which of course is never true. So what I'm talking about is a real fusion, where elements fuse together, where we fuse concepts and aesthetics, not necessarily material. Every material is material at the moment in rock music. Everything goes. And that should be the same in art music. So I hope that we get to this point where we get a very diverse world with a lot of different opinions of what music and what art is, and something that reflects a really diverse culture that is not bound by ideologies or the past histories.